Hello and welcome to Epiphytic Cacti. Today let's take a look at Rhipsalis clavata form Delicatula. Rhipsalis clavata grows in Brazil, and according to the IUNCRedlist.org site, Rhipsalis clavata is near threatened. I see this plant for sale a lot, but never under that name. In the United States, I continuously see this listed as Rhipsalis capilliformis. There are a few problems with this. One, Rhipsalis capilliformis is no longer a recognized species name. Rhipsalis capilliformis is referring to Rhipsalis terris form Capilliformis. And that alone definitely confirms that this is absolutely not that plant because of the bloom. These blooms are absolutely Rhipsalis clavata blooms. I've done a couple of other videos on different forms of Rhipsalis terris. I will put some bloom pictures in of some of the Rhipsalis terris blooms that I've had, and you can see the marked difference. I suspect that part of the confusion about Rhipsalis terris form Capilliformis, when you look at the description listed on Rhipsalis.com, one of the things that it notes is that the little ends, the little terminal ends, are very similar to that of Rhipsalis clavata. I think that that helped to get this misidentified because it doesn't really look like the standard form of Rhipsalis clavata exactly. And you know, it's got like the real slender segments, and I can see how it might have been attributed to that identity. But like I said, blooms alone, that should tell you everything that you need to know. You know, another thing that I have found is that because Rhipsalis are so wildly mislabeled, if you really want to collect Rhipsalis and collect them accurately or identify your Rhipsalis accurately, the best thing that you can do is inform yourself, because most Rhipsalis are mislabeled. When I shop around and I see this plant and I see it listed under Rhipsalis capilliformis, I instantly know that it's Rhipsalis clavata form Delicatula. You know, especially when I see those blooms, instantly. And if you inform yourself, you can protect yourself. When I very first started collecting Rhipsalis, I now own a lot of different Rhipsalis clavata plants, a lot of them, and I got most of them under different names. The big difference between the standard form and this form, not that much. The blooms are identical. That's the other thing. You know, I've said it a couple of different times. You're not going to end up with like wildly, outrageously different blooms when you're talking about different forms. The blooms are all going to be similar. They might be a little bigger. They might be a little bit smaller. They might have like a pink throat where, you know, another form doesn't. The small things like that. But the whole flower is not just suddenly going to change into a wildly different flower than all of the other forms. That's not a real thing. The really big difference here is that you can see this is more of the standard form, and you can see that these are really chubby and they're short. And if kept in really good light, they will just get, you know, real chubby and short and kind of funny like this. I think it's really interesting that this at one time was classified as a Hatiora because it's very reminiscent, I think, of some of that growth, and I thought it was very interesting. A couple of things that I've learned about this plant particularly. I learned a hard lesson about temperatures last year. When the temperature dropped around 45 degrees, this plant got very, very angry and it just started dropping clades. I will try never to leave this plant out with temperatures below 50 degrees ever again, because a lot of my plant fell off. It just kept dropping clades. And then even when I moved it in, it took a long time for it to recover, and I was just losing huge segments off of it. And the other thing that I noticed about this particular plant is that it's a mealybug magnet. Really bad. Some of the plants indoors, mealybugs just absolutely love them. And what's funny is that they are usually plants like this one, which grows very heavily all throughout the entire year. It is always producing new growth, and that is a mealybug's favorite snack. It absolutely loves to get after the blooms and after the new growth. It's the soft tissue. And this plant always seems to have it in abundance. And I'm sure that many other pests that prefer kind of that softer new growth tissue are absolutely going to love this plant. In terms of care, I do find that this plant is generally more thirsty than some of the other Rhipsalis. Definitely likes its water, and it will definitely get... It's kind of a tricksy thing with this one because I feel like this one is temperamental in the fact that if it dries out too much, it can be a little bit harder to get it to come back exactly. So this one I just keep a little bit better of an eye on. The one that's sitting over there in that little tiny pot, I lost a big chunk of that plant because I didn't catch the watering in time. It's in my epiphytic mix just like every other plant. You know, the next time I go to repot this one, I might actually put a little bit less chunky material in. I have noted that, you know, I have several of these. I think that I have about 5 of them, so I think I have 2 more of these. At some point, I'm definitely going to repot this and put all of these in the same pot because now it's just getting a little bit unruly. All 3 of these plants are in here because all 3 of these plants have a bloom or blooms in different sort of states. This one is obviously kind of my largest one that I've had. This one I featured in another video, and I will actually pull a thumbnail out of that video for this plant because it gives you an idea of just how fast this plant grows. I would definitely say that it is one of the fastest growing Rhipsalis. It is not the fastest, but is one of the fastest. So it's really fun to have in your collection. Here you can see the ends of this particular plant, and you can see just all this new growth, all this growth at the ends here is just all new growth, new growth. You can also see with my hand in here the major difference between, you know, what they call form Delicatula and then the standard form of Clavata, being that these segments are thinner and longer generally. And there's another really telltale sign about Clavata, and it is very, very apparent in the new growth, is that it always sort of flanges out at the ends like this. See how that flanges out there? And that is something that it is not really something I've seen in any other Rhipsalis that is common. So you can see, I mean, you see how it just kind of flanges out. So if your plant does that, you now know exactly what it is. How cute is that? It's so pretty. So here's this little guy too. And you can see just heavy, heavy amounts of new growth. You can see the new growth is a little bit pink. It's very pretty. Got a little breakage there. Here you can see again, you can see the little flanged ends, particularly in the new growth. You can also see it when they're mature, but it is very, very, very evident in the new growth. So now if we come in here to look at the blooms, you can see how absolutely fantastic these are. They are solid white. And in like sunlight or whatever, you can get like tiny hints of other colors, but generally they're just solid white. One of the most shocking things to me, and this just really keeps surprising me, it is so surprising and strange, that I never read anywhere that these plants are fragrant. So I'm always very, very surprised whenever it comes, whenever something like this blooms, then I'm like, wow, that's really fragrant. How did I never read that in any material about this plant? And this one has a nice, soft, floral kind of scent. It is not overpowering by any stretch of the imagination. It's just a really soft, beautiful floral scent. And you can see the abundance of flowers that are coming out of this, and also note where the flowers are coming from. So they are always coming from the terminal ends, and you can see there can be more than one flower coming out. So this one's got twins, 2, that one's got twins. There's generally, well, these have 2. So, you know, 1 or 2 flowers usually. I mean, sometimes you get real crazy. Like this kid right here is like, well, I'm just going to be an overachiever. But you can see just how many flowers come out of this. And if you hang it high and you look up at it, it is one of the most absolutely fantastic displays. See what I mean? So if you hang it high and you really look up at it, you just get like this outrageous view of all of these little white flowers. it's really, 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 really floriferous. It really, and for me, it was kind of funny because the first time it bloomed was indoors in the fall when I moved it inside. And it was this plant and it only had like 1 or 2 blooms on it. And I noticed that quite a bit. So I noticed quite a bit that the first time a Rhipsalis blooms, it generally seems to want to do like 1 or 2 little blooms and then, or just like a handful, just a handful of little blooms. And then the next time, whenever it comes for its normal blooming season, like this guy, it's like, oh yeah, I'm really going to bloom. Now, I don't have the slightest idea as to why, and I think this is rather interesting, as to why there are so many less flowers on this side. I'm not really sure. I feel like there's 2 kind of distinct plants in here, so I feel like that might be part of it, and I can see that this side is a little bit smaller, but it might also have had something to do with growing conditions. It might be that this side was always facing more light, so it just has a much stronger flush of blooms. Here, if we go up on this one, again, you can see just new growth, just massive amounts of new growth. There is so much new growth on this thing. It is just crazy. And once again, you can see the little flanges at the tips of the clades. So, again, if you see that, you no doubt have Rhipsalis clavata. And it could be either form. Generally, both of the forms do it. So this one had 1 teeny tiny little bloom on it. So like I said, see that? It's just 1 teeny tiny. It hasn't even opened yet, but it is so teeny tiny and it's just the one. So either a little bit later it's going to produce some more blooms, or that's just what I'm going to get next year. It will do like a proper flush of blooms. This one too, you can see it's actually a fairly long little dude. This is the one that I lost an awful lot of, and you can see telltale signs here of the fact that this was just not getting enough water, and you can see all the little aerial roots that are coming out of the joints. If your plant does that, and there you can see a little dead piece there. I mean, it can happen really, really quick, and when they decide to dry up, they just decide to dry up. Now, if your plant is doing that, and you're noticing that you're having to water it a lot, and your Rhipsalis is doing that, producing lots of little aerial roots and stuff like that, it's just time to repot it. That's just that. And you can see the little tiny little blooms again. First time bloom on this one, and this is what I mean. I'm getting this little cluster of blooms that's coming out of here, and so it's possible that next year I will get a larger flush of blooms. A lot of times in the other videos, I'll talk about things that are confused, or, things that could be confused with this. And this is actually a really unique Rhipsalis in that not much can really be confused with this. I can't really think of anything that can be confused with this. And it comes down to little flanged ends on the clades. That's what it comes down to. There are some Rhipsalis like Campos-portoana over here, and then up here there's one that's kind of back there hanging, and that one is either Campos-portoana or it is Burchellii. You can see the resemblance between them, but neither of those species have those little flanged edges. So that's something that is just so distinct to this one that it would be really hard to confuse it with anything else. As well as the blooms. The blooms on this are a little bit hard to confuse with either of those species, because these blooms are white, where those species have a different color to the throat of their flowers, even though they bear some resemblance to these little white bell-like blooms. I hope that you've enjoyed looking at Rhipsalis clavata form Delicatula with me. Thank you for watching, and happy cacti growing.